So there was a slight delay with the beginning of the session because due to the previous session finishing late, meetings are back to back. So we do our best to keep time, but we try to not eat too much into the time also for the Q&A. Thank you very much for joining us here in the room and online. Also, two of our speakers will be joining us hybrid. My name is Isabel Ebert. Together with my colleague Nathalie Stadelmann, I lead the BTEC project of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I'm the moderator for this session. To start with, I would like to thank the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, and in particular Liria and her team for the smooth cooperation on the reports that we are presenting today. They are very complementary in nature. The report of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights discusses artificial intelligence and business and human rights from the angle of the state duty to protect, and in particular with regard to procurement, as well as with regard to the corporate responsibility of companies that are not developing AI, but are purchasing it from AI developing companies. And the report by the BTEC project is very complementary in nature because we focus on actually the responsibilities of those companies that are developing and deploying AI, as well as the state duty to protect in requiring those companies to respect human rights, as well as access to remedy. So just to set the scope of today's session, I will present the key messages from the report on the practical applications of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights to the activities of the technology companies, including specifically the activities relating to artificial intelligence, which you can also find online. So this is 5953. And then Liria will present the key messages from the report on from the UN Working Group. So not to further delay the event, and just to also announce that we have three expert panelists that are joining us: Maria Pascanalis from Global Partners Digital, followed by Richard Wingfield from BSR joining us online, and Jin Hua from Cacao also joining us online. Our report obviously states the key message that AI innovation can bring a lot of promises, but also peril for human rights, in particular in terms of the complex human rights challenges and some of them in their unforeseen nature. We acknowledge that the speed and scale of which AI technologies are evolving outpaces current regulatory frameworks, and this raises concern around transparency, discrimination, and misuse among some of the issues that we will discuss in the report. And in that regard, clear roles and responsibilities are essential for addressing these risks. In this sense, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights are a helpful framework to orientate AI innovation in a responsible manner. With regard to Pillar 1, the state has the duty to protect individuals from third-party harm, including from corporate misuse of AI. With regard to Pillar 2, corporations are expected to prevent and mitigate rights abuses stemming from their AI technologies and services aligned with the UNGPs. And with regard to Pillar 3, accountability and remedy for human rights harms resulting from the use of AI technologies needs to be guaranteed. You will see that the report puts an emphasis actually on Pillar 2, because we see a lot of the AI innovation obviously happening in the private sector, as you know. And we emphasize that companies must embed the responsibility to respect human rights as the core of AI innovation. And this cannot be just as a sort of optional or symbolic respect for human rights, but it needs to be part of every decision in the development and deployment of AI tools. And this also includes prioritizing human well-being alongside performance and efficiency of the AI tools. We emphasize, for those of you in the room who are UNGP's experts, human rights due diligence as a proactive and ongoing management exercise, human rights due diligence as a cornerstone of responsible business conduct in the AI space, and have also been working very closely with the OECD on clarifying responsibilities under the UNGPs and the OECD multinational guidelines for responsible business conduct in that regard. As you know, human rights due diligence consists of roughly 4 steps. Some companies structure them differently, but we work on a 4-step basis based on also meaningful stakeholder engagement. Step 1, identifying potential and actual human rights impacts across the whole AI lifecycle from design and deployment. Step 2, mitigating risks through corporate policies, oversight, and targeted actions. Step 3, tracking the effectiveness of interventions and openly communicating the results. And step 4, addressing a broad range of human rights and not just those that are easily measurable. We put a specific emphasis also on the fact that when companies start taking action in order to mitigate harm, they need to do so by the concept of severity, meaning the severity of impact should be judged on the scale, scope, and irremediability of the harm, and it shouldn't be done by convenience or proximity. And in that regard, regular independent impact assessments involving human rights experts, also with a regional expertise, bearing in mind the vast field of where AI can be deployed around the globe, is essential. We also discuss specific human rights risks resulting from AI business models and incentives in corporate management, arguing that some of the harmful AI outcomes we see currently are not accidental in nature, that they actually stem from business practices that prioritize growth or efficiency over safety and fairness. For example, incentive for executives may reward rapid innovation without actually taking into account human rights risks when developing and deploying AI. And here we propose rethinking the KPIs inside AI developing and deploying companies, rewarding rights-respecting behavior, and stress-testing AI systems to uncover hidden harms embedded in the design as part of business models considerations. Maria Paz will talk more about requirements for stakeholder engagement, but you will also see that the report emphasizes some good practices for meaningful stakeholder engagement around AI products and services, and emphasizes that working with civil society and affected stakeholders cannot be an afterthought, but needs to be really considered along the whole AI lifecycle. You can see the specific considerations in the report. I will not go into detail in sake of time. One key debate that you've been probably following in the public is how meaningful transparency can be ensured around AI. And while we see that there's a growing number of corporate statements on human rights and public disclosures being demanded from AI companies, there's still a lot of inconsistency in terms of reporting and transparency, which hinders also accountability. And this is particularly lacking and fragmented in high-risk domains with regard to, thank you very much, surveillance, border control, and defense, where the stakes for human rights are very high, and repurposing of technology can lead to very severe harm. So this is why we also find it very timely that these two reports are presented in conjunction, because states must really step up in guiding and regulating AI behavior, both with regard to their own use of technology by states, but in particular with regard to how businesses develops it. Embedding human rights safeguards in regulatory frameworks on AI is key in terms of requiring AI companies to assess human rights risks. And Leroy will go more into detail. And we really stress that grounding AI regulation in the UNGPs and international human rights law ensures coherence internationally, also with regard to companies that are operating inherently transnational and hence also are looking for global international standards to align their business practices. And this also is emphasized and links very well to the UN Working Group's report on AI. We emphasized also that the policy incentive that the states can employ in terms of requiring businesses to respect human rights in the format of industrial policies, public procurements, but also development finance, as well as in technical standard setting processes to reflect human rights principles. And we welcome the activities by the ITU and embedding more human rights considerations in those processes. I'm slowly coming to a close, but you will see that, of course, we are also not forgetting access to remedy, but also acknowledge that there are specific challenges in order to ensuring when AI causes harm, that those that are affected have also pathways to justice. You know that the UNGPs emphasize different type of mechanisms, judicial ones, state-based non-judicial mechanisms, and non-state mechanisms. So you can also read the BTEC foundational papers with regard to those. But there are specific aspects stemming from AI in terms of technical complexity, opacity, and unclear responsibility across the tech stack that make access to remedy and particularly challenging in this regard. And we'll be looking further into this in the coming year. So this is the part of the report that basically goes into detail around the application of the 3 pillars of the UN Guiding Principles. You can read more of the nuance in the report. And then we put 2 additional emphasis in the report. On the one hand, on women and girls, and on the other hand, of the role of investors, which BTEC has been working on since a while. We found that women and girls face heightened vulnerability in AI, in particular with regard to systemic inequalities and underrepresentation that are then exacerbated by AI models. And we found this is really a concern because this is a vulnerable group within vulnerable groups already, right? So you also have a lot of intersectional issues at stake. And while AI can also be used to empower women and girls, it brings gender-specific risks like deepfakes, bias in hiring and lending, and also surveillance practices by AI facilitated through AI technologies. And you can see some recommendations how tech companies could mitigate such risks in the report. Last but not least, with regard to the role of investors, investors, both public and private ones, can influence how tech firms uphold human rights standards. They're often a very important driver in steering also incentives for in business models. At the same time, in certain investor groups, there's limited awareness, particularly around the AI-related human rights concerns. And at the same time, we also see a smaller group of investors starting to push companies to mitigate and prevent harm. So this is an additional driver for change that we hope we can collaborate more closely together. Which leads me to conclude that the report overall stresses that the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights offer a helpful blueprint to address risks and maximize also at the same time AI benefits because they safeguard AI products and services against harm. And while we stress the important message that there are some progress in terms of both state and business behavior in managing risks related to human rights with regard to AI, we need much more effort to essentially apply the UNGPs to technology and AI governance. And we hope to work on this together with the colleagues from the UN Working Group as well. Thank you very much. And this leaves me to conclude and hand over to Lyria.
Thank you. Afternoon, dear participants, dear colleagues. It is very nice momentum to have 2 reports, which actually fit together very well, because as Isabel mentioned, the BTEC project was looking at the issues that are relevant for technological companies, and we were looking for the issues of procurement and also of deployment. So that's why some issues might also overlap, because naturally it's very difficult to distinguish completely these 2 aspects, because the procurement happens from technological companies mostly. But let me try also to present briefly what our report deals with. And first of all, let me say that the Working Group on Business and Human Rights has recognized the vital role of technologies already in the past. So we believe in the positive impacts of technologies and artificial intelligence. Of course, in this report, we are looking more at the let's say, adverse impacts. But having said that, it's not only about negative things in this report. This report also captures some good practices. We call them emerging practices, how to integrate both for states, but also for businesses, how to integrate the human rights considerations in AI procurement and deployment. So it is not just about adverse issues, but also about some positive aspects. I have some visuals. I hope that they will be seen. Yes, not so much, but okay. Anyhow, so let me say that the report looks into 4 main aspects, or has 4 main objectives. Firstly, what we try to do, we try to review the regulatory frameworks. both voluntary standards, and we found about 1,000 standards that deal with AI in various forums, starting from international organizations, ending up with national level, CSO level. We also looked at mandatory regulation. So the report gives, let's say, maps the standards that exist with regard to AI and human rights considerations at the moment, everywhere in the world. Secondly, we looked for emerging practices, both at states, because states are also using AI, not only businesses, and also business companies. And looking into those emerging practices, we try also to clarify the responsibilities of businesses and states in this respect. Thirdly, we looked at the issue of remedy, which, as Isabel already pointed out, has specific implications when we speak about adverse impacts or violations happening because of use of AI. And last but not least, we also provided some guidance, let's see, how to mainstream the human rights aspects in AI procurement by states and by businesses, and also in the deployment. So let me share some observations that we discovered during the consultations and also our research, and which you can, of course, in detail can find in the report. First of all, if we look at some of the trends, it's very clear that in a number of regions, the states are shifting from voluntary standards, voluntary regulations to mandatory regulations. And this is probably quite clear that we will see more and more in the future, because apart from the regional level, of course, we have some developments in Europe, in Council of Europe, in the European Union, but we also see similar developments in the other regions, and in particular at the national level. Now, when we speak about the regulatory framework, it is important to note that states have very different approaches, and some states, they are, let's say, embedding these human rights considerations in specific legislations, regulations that are dealing with AI. But as we know, there are very many regulations, laws that are closely connected. They're not directly about AI, but use of AI, but they are very closely related. So what is important that these human rights considerations, they are also mainstreamed in the legislations that are closely related to the use of AI and other technologies. Now, if we, let's say, make some conclusions on the regulatory framework, what is very clear that even despite the positive trends that there is emerging regulation, and for businesses, it's always very, very important to have the legal certainty, to have very clear standards, to have consistency among the standards. Despite the fact, we still have found gaps in regulatory standards and regulatory landscape. We still think it is fragmented. In particular, for example, when we speak about the definition of AI as such, there is no global consensus. If we speak about the definition of ethics, which is very closely related to the AI, again, there is no global consensus. Of course, we have some guidance on this, but we think that it would be quite beneficial to have this common understanding. Then we also observed that when some of the regulatory frameworks have been developed, they did not really sufficiently integrate the perspective of the global South countries. So now, if global South countries, if they are not, if their, let's say, specificity is not integrated, they would be much more adversely affected than the other countries. Then this regulatory framework provides for very broad exceptions. And some of those exceptions are really of concern, because those exceptions, they might pave the way for use and existence of technologies which are in principle incompatible with the human rights. So the broad exceptions. Then again, if we talk about the process, how some regulatory frameworks were developed, the involvement of civil society, of CSOs, has been very, very limited. And of course, there are other gaps that we have seen, but just briefly, I would like to highlight these ones. Now, on the other hand, what we see that both states and private sector are not only integrating more and more use of AI and deployment of AI in, let's say, critical public and private sector functions, but there is even pressure on the states, on the public, on the private sector to integrate artificial intelligence in various functions. So here we can speak about law enforcement, social protection, finance, surveillance, and other sectors. However, when we look at how AI is used in those sectors, then two things emerge. First, that both states, many states and businesses actually procure and deploy AI without considering or without integrating the human rights considerations. And secondly, what we also have seen that in particular with regard to the use of AI by states, usually the issue emerges or the issue becomes relevant and acute when something happens. So this is also what we have observed, and that again that urges to take the actions now and to have policies, to have safeguards, to have due diligence now, rather than when the adverse impacts happen, because if they happen at the level of the state, this may have much broader effect than, let's say, used by some companies, but not necessarily, of course. Then what would be also very important to underline is what, let's say, actions we are suggesting. Among those recommendations, I will just briefly touch upon that and we can discuss it in more details. And of course, this is very detailed in the report. So if we speak about the actions of states, states, first of all, can be very good examples. We have state-owned companies, we have state procurement, and of course, to implement the human rights considerations requires certain actions. Let's start from the simple but not so simple aspect, the capacities. The capacities of procurement persons to prepare, let's say, documentations, to understand that really the companies, even if there are requirements, the companies that are participating in the public procurement, that those companies are human rights compliant in their products and in their services, in their operations. So the capacities, of course, this is something that needs to be looked into. Needless to say that capacity is about the AI issues, but then the capacity is about the human rights issues. So we are all talking about this very interdisciplinary aspects and capacities. Then what is also very important is that mandatory human rights due diligence would be integrated, because without this, it would be really very difficult to ensure that those adverse impacts or any kind of risks would be identified or mitigated and addressed. What is also very important, and what is very specific to the use of AI, that in a number of cases, it's not known that AI is being used, both by states and companies. And what is important to underline is transparency and various practices that we have discovered. For example, where states establish special registers for registration of some AI systems that they are using, for example, in social security or other fields. So to start with that, because I hope that you will agree with me that if we don't have transparency, there is no way to have remedy if something happens. So this aspect is very important. Then also what is very important is oversight mechanisms, because in particular, when we speak about state using AI itself or businesses using AI or procuring AI, it's very important that there are oversight mechanisms that would be monitoring this situation. So it's not only disclosure, but there are other mechanisms that would allow monitoring. So human rights due diligence is not enough, it's very important, but there should be also some other mechanisms. With regard to businesses, what we have observed that businesses, not all, some are very advanced, but many businesses are still at a very early stage of overall even acknowledgement that certain use of AI could result in adverse effects. So what we recommend to businesses, first of all, to identify all the systems that are being used in the business companies, because it's not always clear. Secondly, to identify what are the impacts or what could be the impacts of the operations, products, or services. And in doing that, it's very important that it's done with the stakeholders. Not only because stakeholders are monitoring that situation, have the capacities, but also have knowledge. And we have realized that a number of businesses or even sectors, once you start discussing about those issues, then there is a discovery. So to include the stakeholders, it's particularly important because they are the ones who could really demonstrate in detail what kind of adverse impact could be in one or another operation or product. It is very important, of course, to do the human rights due diligence, to make the human rights impact assessment. And considering that right now we have discovered that a number of businesses are not engaging in these practices, so there are risks for biased decision making, for exploitative worker surveillance and other negative aspects in the working place, or, for example, manipulation of consumer behavior. So these are just a few examples. In the report, we're looking at 3 of the big functions of businesses, as much as, of course, the length of the report allowed us. We would have wished to include more, but the length is always very, very limited. And with regard also to businesses, we frequently hear that any kind of new obligations for businesses, in particular for SMEs, this is a huge burden. So in that respect, we consider that it is important to work at the sectorial level, to work with the value chain companies, not just say that you will not be our provider, but really to embed and support with guidance, to leverage also through the cross-sectoral cooperation, within sectoral cooperation, because this we also found some good practices, so they do exist and it's possible to extrapolate them. With regard to the remedy, clearly the remedy is insufficient. It's very specific aspects that we are facing with regard to access to remedy, or even when remedy is accessed, how to document the harms, how to find the linkages, how to link it to particular companies, whether it would be a mother company or a company in the value chain, and so on. But what we would be recommending is, first of all, strengthening the enforcement mechanisms and also shifting the burden of proof to AI providers, because this is essential if we want the remedy to be effective. We have found a number of good practices, as I mentioned, and for example, with regard to states, it's introducing safeguards in AI deployment. At regional level, we have model clauses for procuring AI in regard to human rights aspects, standardized public procurement policies, algorithm registers that I already mentioned, or mandatory impact assessments. And in the private sector, for example, there are good practices with regard to development of AI ethical frameworks, evaluation of AI projects when they are planned, stakeholder engagement when some new products, for example, or systems are being deployed, or, as I mentioned, cross-sectoral collaboration. So this is what are, let's say, the main recommendations, and we have been also a number of times asked if we are, let's say, promoting some kind of mandatory global standard, because we've been talking about in the report that there is a need to have consensus, to have the policy consistency, and to have very clear standards. So I think it would be very difficult to talk about a specific AI human rights mandatory framework at the global level, but all those developments, mandatory legislative developments that are happening, if they would include already human rights considerations, that would be very good. And then to address the consistency issue through the global cooperation between the states. So this is also very important, that this plays a role in the global governance for AI. So through the governance, not necessarily necessarily through mandatory instrument, which would be very nice. But of course, we are also very realistic, and we think that it's important to pick up already on the developments that are ongoing right now. And I will stop here because I'm sure that probably the time is over, and I leave this space for the other speakers and for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Liria. And of course, there's a lot more to discover in both reports that I invite you to read. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Maria Paz Canales from Global Partners Digital. She will talk about the key concerns from civil societies on practices of states and businesses with regard to AI and best practices for stakeholder engagement. Mariana.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to be today here commenting this very great report. It's like really difficult to come after such a comprehensive account of the state of the land that are provided in a complementary way by these two reports. As Isabel just mentioned, my idea is to focus a little bit in some specific point. As Isabel mentioned, I work for Global Partners Digital. This is a civil society organization that in general work to underpin human rights approach in digital technology governance at the global level, but also collaborated with partners across the world. And specifically on the topic of AI governance, we developed a couple of years now ago, a framework to think about governance in the different layers that had been mentioned in the two reports, and also in thinking how to go one step further in terms of unpacking what it means, implementation, particularly from the UN guiding principles in business and human rights. And for us, there are 5 key values that we want to see reflected in general at any kind of level of regulatory approach, either like internal policies by companies, public procurement of artificial intelligence, or more hard regulations, either like at the local level or global level. And I'm going to mention those specific principles or values, but I'm going to focus probably in 2 or 3 of them. So the first one, it's build policy approaches grounded in the international human rights law, which is something that is very clear from the 2 reports, and I think that is cornerstone in terms of ensuring the consistency in the approaches that we all like constantly claim for. But at the end, when we look at the landscape of artificial intelligence regulations or policies, we saw a lot of fragmentation still. Some of them are anchored more in ethical frameworks that, as Lyra mentioned, are very different from one place to another, from one group of practice to another. Other ones choose a human rights approach, and we think that definitely the common base can be given by the international human rights framework, and it should be there that we would try to focus to anchor the provisions. In that sense, I really want to highlight and celebrate one specific paragraph of the report from the working group in terms of like recognizing that there are specific uses of artificial intelligence that are incompatible with the exercise of human rights, and particularly attention should be paid in terms of those uses in order to address them through regulation, but also to corporate a commitment in not implementing those uses that goes against the respect of human rights. So I think that that's one of my highlights in terms of the values that we have in our framework. The second element that we highlight in our framework, it's develop a risk-based approach in the design, development, and deployment of AI. I'm not going to spend too much today on that because I think that had been sufficient discussion in previous iterations of this type of session. I'm going to go to the third element, which is promote open and inclusive design in the deployment of the use of the AI. And there, I'm going to take on what Isabel was announcing, that it's the unpacking of like, what is the benefit of like working on AI policies or AI regulation with a more inclusive stakeholder engagement approach, and what that brings to the discussions and to the table. What is the benefit for, as I say, like either private actors or public actor governments? The first thing is the argument of legitimacy, in the sense of like bringing early on different stakeholders from the society to be part of the design and the evaluation of the specific risk than the implementation of specific artificial intelligence system can have in the society, provide an element of legitimacy in terms of the buy-in, in terms of the technology and in terms of the application of the technology, that is really positive. So beyond the obvious fact that that early engagement, as Isabel mentioned, that is captured in the report, that is it's essential, that is not an afterthought, but it's something that is by design there from the very beginning, and very mindful in terms of like trying to increase the diversity of the different stakeholders that are bring on during the process. And this is because, for stating the obvious, that also the previous Human Rights Commissioner mentioned it in one of his last interventions related to technology issues, technology had human rights consequences. So at the end, the only way in which we can like know what is unknown so far is like bringing that diversity that need to be in terms of like the diversity of groups that are considered with particular interest in traditionally marginalized and vulnerable groups, but also in terms of like multidisciplinary expertise. And this is something that it works in every layer of the engagement. So we need to implement this when we are thinking about private policies from corporate actor, but also it's necessary to be captured when the state is thinking about procurement of system, artificial intelligence system that will be part of the deployment of specific policies. So it doesn't stay only at the level of like regulatory discussion, which is the most common place in which we heard about this. And finally, it's also part of the global governance discussion on artificial intelligence. So one of the big discussions that we have currently, it's about the terms of reference of the two new mechanisms for artificial intelligence governance that have been set out by the Global Digital Compact. I am referring to the scientific panel on AI and the Global Dialogue on AI. And in those two, one of the elements that has been very contentious so far in the negotiation among the states had been particularly how to capture the good level of stakeholder engagement in terms of like making those mechanisms really meaningful. Then the second thing that I want to highlight related to the inclusive stakeholder engagement benefit, it's that this will provide also better clarity in terms of the chain of responsibilities that happen when we are looking into the designing and provision, procurement of artificial intelligence system and the use. And one thing that I am seeing like very contentious in terms of like the relationship between the different companies that can be involved in a process of procurement of artificial intelligence system is the determination where the responsibilities start or end for each one of the members in the chain of provision of the technology. And I think that it's important that we evaluated from the perspective of the final user, the one that it's being impacted by the use of the artificial intelligence system. Because even though we can go in the more like legally relevant discussion in terms of like how to more effectively assign responsibility, at the end, looking into the transparency for the exercise of effective remedy that Lira was mentioning, that is core part of the report that she presented, it's very important that the way in which we design the chain of liability related to the provision and production of the system, it's something that can make sense and is visible for the final user. Because if we get lost in identifying to whom go and claim when specific harm happen, we will make much more opaque and difficult to operate any kind of oversight. So I think that because of the time, I'm going to stop there. Happy to take like more detailed question related to best practice on effective stakeholder engagement. But for now, just to close with the other two elements that I haven't mentioned related to our framework, which is ensuring transparency, precisely what I was referring now, and the final one, holding designers and deployers of AI accountable for the risk and harm, which is linked also with the last point that I was making about like determining what it means that for the final user. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and sorry that, for the timing. We try to stick around after the session a little bit outside as well. If you want to engage further with Maria, pass. Over to Richard from BSR now. He works a lot with those companies that are developing AI and will speak about best practices for human rights risk mitigation, including human rights due diligence, but also how businesses are actually procuring and deploying AI if they're not those developing the AI. Richard, over to you, and please turn your attention to the screen here in the room.
Great. Thankfully, thank you for that, and hopefully you can all see and hear me at this point. So I think we know by this point that many of the largest tech companies who are the key developers of artificial intelligence are at a more sophisticated stage when it comes to their AI governance. And we've seen quite a few years now of practice in terms of the development of specific AI policies and principles, which often include risks to people or fundamental rights, and that they are relatively sophisticated now at making sure that those policies and practices are implemented throughout the company's AI development. But what I want to do is perhaps talk a little bit about the companies that are the key deployers of AI, who are generally at a slightly earlier stage. And we've seen a range of different ways that these companies are now procuring and deploying the AI systems themselves. We're seeing a number of companies who are generally larger companies, not to the point where they would develop their own AI systems, but are very closely working with the companies that do develop AI systems, and particularly those that develop foundational models that AI systems are then built upon. And we're seeing them collaborate to develop bespoke and more specific and customized AI systems that then are either used internally by the company, or are then used in customer or user-facing ways as well. So the value chain is not distinct between developers and deployers. Many deployers are working closely with developers to create customized AI solutions and systems that they then use themselves. At the same time, we are also seeing companies purchase essentially off-the-shelf AI systems, often from those AI developers themselves, and then using them, which gives them less ability to influence the way that those systems are then designed and the potential impacts that they may have. And I think what's common, particularly for that second category, is that that is taking place in many different parts of the business and often without any overall governance or oversight. So you'll have an HR team that is buying AI systems to help with things like recruitment. You'll have operational teams buying AI systems that help with operational efficiencies. You might have comms and media teams starting to use generative AI tools. So AI is being procured in a range of different ways by different parts of the company, often without a sort of holistic approach to the risks that come with that. So then moving on to the practices that we are seeing emerge in terms of human rights mitigation, we are starting to see many AI deployers develop their own AI policies and principles, often grounded in human rights standards, but often not as well. What we aren't yet seeing is the implementation of those yet. So they're often quite strong in terms of their values and commitments, but they're not filtering down into the teams that are actually procuring those AI systems. They're not being integrated into the considerations around what AI systems they're buying from whom and the checks that are being made to deal with some of the human rights risks that have been articulated. And for some companies, we're seeing quite a distinction between the responsible AI teams that are often involved in using AI and the human rights or sustainability teams as well. So you have these two parallel emerging practices where you have a responsible AI policy and a human rights policy, and those teams and those policies aren't always strongly connected. And so a lot of the work that we do is trying to build the team's capacity to work together. Some of the good practice that we have seen are establishments of AI oversight boards, often internally bringing together cross teams from different functions that provide a more holistic approach to AI governance and policy implementation. We are seeing some companies start to undertake dedicated human rights impact assessments for particularly high-risk AI systems that they might be purchasing and looking to deploy. And I think the regulations that we're seeing, like the EU's AI Act, will only encourage the undertaking of human rights impact assessments as well, because those are mandated in some of the new laws that we are seeing. And of course, we are now starting to see AI considered part of a company's broader human rights salience. So recognition that AI and the risks that come with it are part of a company's human rights profile. And so human rights teams, at least being aware that AI is an issue that they need to deal with. Still a lot of challenges, as I said, in terms of implementation. And I'd highlight that two of the main challenges are ones that have been mentioned by previous speakers, so around ensuring transparency to customers, users, and other stakeholders of when AI is being used. And secondly, establishing remedial and grievance processes. So often, in the absence of knowing when AI is creating a risk, it's very difficult for customers, users, or other third parties to raise concerns. So existing remedial and grievance policies we're generally finding are not fit for purpose anymore when it comes to AI. And so adapting those to better fit the needs of AI is priority as well. I'll draw my remarks to a close there and pass on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Richard, for this illustration. I'm now, without further ado, turning over to South Korea. We're joined by Jinhua from Cacao Group.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Jinhua Ha, working with AI safety at Cacao Corp. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this meaningful session, Advancing Human Rights in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. The topic that is given on my plate is how businesses are developing rights-respecting AI, strengthening AI risk management practices. Today, with sincere appreciation, I would like to give a very brief introduction of how Cacao has been paving the way to implement rights-respecting AI, which can lead to enhanced AI risk management. Cacao, as an IT service provider, it is inevitable to avoid AI risks. Firstly, because we have B2C business model, and secondly, in addition to providing a messenger service, because Cacao and its affiliates continuously endeavor to present various services using AI, including games, entertainment, banking, and etc. Rights respecting AI starts from setting principles and developing self-checklist for service deployment. Among 10 AI ethics principles, the last principle especially emphasizes user autonomy, preventing AI addiction while enhancing AI literacy. This shows how we envision responsible AI, not only making stronger safety measures, but also empowering the capacity of actual users of different age group, gender, religious beliefs, and etc. In terms of reinforcing AI service risk management, we have a mandatory obligation to officially submit the CEO confirmed checklist review result in advance to AI service deployment. In 2024, we also developed a risk management framework for AI models called AI Safety Initiative. And this year, an AI safeguard called Kanana Safeguard was open sourced on Hugging Face, proving its strength and uniqueness of understanding and processing the Korean context. The safeguard consists of rights-related taxonomies such as hate, sexual content, crime, child sexual exploitation, and etc. Internal awareness raising activities and internal interdepartment AI policy review system is also taking place. Lastly, not only focused on AI service, but service in general, we are in process of setting necessary child risk management tool and governance system based on CRC and UNICEF's guidelines. In conclusion, these are the kind of efforts we put in to lessen AI risks based on human rights perspective and UNGP. Hopefully, Cacao's effort leads to providing safer AI models and services, making people more entertained with convenience, but with enough safety measures. And please follow up with questions, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Jin, for spending your Friday evening with us. We appreciate it very much. And just to say, for those of you who haven't been to South Korea yet, Cacao is really a very interesting company with a lot of interesting applications and services. And we've been engaging with Jin since a long time. This draws the panel to a close. We've been granted a couple of more minutes in this room. You know that the next session actually also focuses on tech, more from an information ecosystem point of view. I'll open the floor now to questions in the room. Please raise, and then I think we can also allow questions online that will be fed to us by the colleagues. Thank you. Okay, so we apparently answered all the questions. And also to say, of course, there's lots to read upon in the report. We thank you very much for having joined us here today. Again, a huge thanks also to the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Always a pleasure to cooperate. And I hope you can perhaps stay on for the next session. Thank you.